Welcome to Unveiling Jesus Christ in part 2 of my video log on the ancient city of Pergamos. I'm John Cassanet, and this is my second video log about Pergamos. In my last log I talked about the history of Pergamos as well as several ancient structures that included the Red Basilica in the modern city of Pergamos, Turkey, the Temple of Athena on the ancient acropolis, along with the Pergamos Library and the Temple of Trajan. In addition to my last video log, you can check out my podcasts on Pergamos, which include Come Follow Me number 6 from November 5, 2023, as well as podcasts that cover Revelation chapter 2, verses 12 through 17 on February 18, 24, 25, and March 2nd and 3rd of 2024. So I've done a total of 6 podcasts discussing this city kind of from the spiritual aspects, and these video logs kind of cover more of the ancient history, geography, and things of that nature. Today we're going to start out talking about the arsenal and palaces located on the acropolis that stands at 1,100 feet overlooking the modern city of Pergamos. So if we go to our map and locate the area where the arsenal and palaces are located, we're now looking at the north and east side of the acropolis behind the Temple of Trajan. The palaces on this cliff provided a nice room with a view for the kings in the Attalid dynasty, the last ruling Greek family before their kingdom was bequeathed to Rome by Attalus III, who died without an heir. It seems a little strange that the king of the Attalid kingdom would simply bequeath the entire kingdom over to the Roman Empire, but it actually makes pretty good sense, really, because they had friendly relations with the Roman Empire that was growing and gaining in power, and by simply giving the kingdom over to the Romans, it avoided any civil war that may have existed between King Attalus's successor. There was actually a challenge to his will by an estranged brother, but after some fighting about the claim, he was literally struck down, and so the Attalid kingdom went to Rome. Now you'll notice in the pictures and images that we're looking at, there's a large reservoir that's been created by a dam built for agricultural purposes in the modern era. So this is not what it looked like in the time of the Greek Empire and during the Attalid kingdom. This reservoir was built recently and is solely for agricultural purposes, so it wasn't like it was there for helping the water situation on the Acropolis. The water on the Acropolis actually came from some underground aqueducts that were built by the Romans in the 2nd century AD. The aqueducts consisted of this underground terracotta pipes consisting of 3 channels that supplied water to the northern spur of the Acropolis. This pipeline was 27 miles long and had 240,000 sections of pipes, and it was all underground. The way that worked was pressure from the higher source of water on one hill would push down on the water down through a valley and up on the lower side of the hill next door. So it was a great system unless there were leaks, because there were lots of pressure in these pipelines going between mountains and through valleys. And also sometimes you could run into problems if you collected a lot of sediment in the bottom of these pipes. You could get these clogs. It kind of occurred to me that anyone wanting to defeat Pergamum, and particularly the Acropolis, just needed to find the underground aqueducts and punch holes in the pipes, and it wouldn't be long before they would get no water flowing to the top of the Acropolis. Anciently, the Acropolis was actually overrun by armies that had to climb the steep walls that you're seeing here on the northeast side of the mountain. It happened because basically the Pergamos residents really weren't paying close attention. This was the case with King Cyrus of Persia, who scaled these walls with his army prior to the time the Greek Empire came to power, and the inattentiveness of the Pergamos saints that caused them to have their Acropolis fall into the hands of the enemies was the subject of John's letter to the church in this city. So you'll find that in chapter 2 of the book of Revelation. Okay, we're now going to turn our attention to the theater in Pergamos. The theater is located just below the Temple of Athena, as shown by the red arrow in this diagram. You can see in this photograph that the Temple of Athena is here toward the left side of the photo, and the theater seating is there on the right. The theater can be accessed through this tunnel with some stairs going down. It'll put you out right near the top of the theater. This is one of the steepest theaters in the world, and it has a capacity of about 10,000 people. It was constructed in the 3rd century BC, and as we kind of come out to get a view of the theater from this long staircase under the ground, it seems like you can see these 78 rows of seats in 3 sections with a height of over 100 feet. Most of the access to the theater was through this large gateway that was not reconstructed by our archaeologist friends. It was a triple gateway, and it's down toward the bottom. Also below the theater is this 810-foot long terrace that's up to 57 feet wide. Now, in order for them to construct this, they had to build it on this high retaining wall, and it was framed on the long side by a stoa. A stoa, by way of reminder, is a covered walkway or portico commonly in use for the public in a place like this. Even though the terrace was almost 60 feet wide, that was still not wide enough for the creation of a permanent circular orchestra section, which would be normal in a Greek theater. So they only built a wooden stage that was taken down when they weren't having any performances. A marble stage was built sometime in the 1st century BC. There were other theaters also built in Pergamos. One notable theater was located in the sanctuary of Asclepius that I'll be talking about and showing you in another video log. Here's a nice picture, if I do say so myself, showing the theater and the Temple of Trajan there in the background. You can see some of those terraces that temple also had to be built on, including the curved arches that were later turned into the cisterns in the Middle Ages. Before we head off to the Temple of Dionysus, I'm going to show you a few more photographs that give you a sense of just how tall or high this theater is here in Pergamum. The Temple of Dionysus is located down at the bottom, as you're seeing in this photograph, but these others will show you the real height of it. Here's yours truly standing about halfway down the theater in Pergamos before I head off to the Temple of Dionysus that was built on that terrace that I showed you earlier, the one that's about 60 feet wide. If you go to the north along that terrace that you're looking at, you'll run into the Temple of Dionysus. Dionysus had the epithet kathagemon, which means the guide. He was also the god of winemaking and known as Bacchus. Some say he was also the god of fertility, and I don't know if that's exactly the case, but he was certainly the god of festivity. He was also the god of insanity and ritual madness, all of which seems to kind of go along with the idea of being the god of winemaking. But at any rate, he was big into religious ecstasy and theater, so I guess it's appropriate that his temple was located here at the bottom of the theater in Pergamos. He was already worshipped in the last part of the 3rd century BC. The Attalid kingdom made him the chief god of their dynasty, and by the 2nd century BC, Eumenes II more than likely is the king of the Attalid Empire that built the temple for Dionysus. It's located on the north end of the terrace, as I've shown you before. The marble temple sits on a podium that was about 12 feet high above the level of the theater terrace. It was 4 columns wide and 2 top columns deep. It was accessed by a staircase of 25 steps. There are few traces of the Hellenistic structure that survive, and the majority of the structure that you're looking at was from a reconstruction by later emperors. We're going to take one last look at the Temple of Dionysus here from the top of the acropolis, looking down on the temple and that terrace that I've talked about at the base of that steep theater. Now in just a moment I'm going to be shooting from that terraced area, and that means I'm going to have to climb up all those stairs to get to the Temple of Zeus located there in the back by those trees. So here we are looking back up from where I was just shooting my video, getting ready to huff and puff up these steep set of stairs in the theater. It looks like it's kind of windy out there and the wind's blowing, so I had to take out the audio because there was such a loud sound. You probably think it's coming from the wind in the area, but it's actually me huffing and puffing through the acropolis area, going back and forth through all of these ruins, and so it's actually just my breath that's causing all the stirring of the grasses. At least that's what it felt like. So as we take a quick right turn, we'll head over to the Temple of Zeus and take a look here at our last images of the theater. So here we are at the map showing us the general proximity of the great altar, or the Temple of Zeus. That's just a little south of the theater that we've been looking at, and down from the Temple of Athena where we began this odyssey. Here's where the Temple of Zeus was located, under these trees that we saw from a distance in that last video clip. The Temple of Zeus was one of the most famous structures in the acropolis at Pergamum, and sometimes it was called the Great Altar. It was probably dedicated to both Zeus and Athena, and it was built by King Dionysus II in the 2nd century BC, and it was to commemorate his victory over the Gauls in 190 BC. As you look at this small grove of trees, you're probably thinking to yourself that the Temple of Zeus doesn't look all that impressive. The reason it doesn't look very impressive is because it's actually being displayed at the Pergamum Museum in Berlin. There were archaeological excavations of this particular temple in the late 1800s, and the Ottoman Empire approved the German archaeologists taking the stonework and everything from the temple to Berlin. So the Pergamum Museum in Berlin opened in 1907, and it includes the artifacts from the Great Altar of Zeus or Athena, as shown in the image that you have on your screen. Interestingly enough, as I was looking for other images about the Temple of Zeus, I came across one where you have a postage stamp from Germany with the image of the altar of Zeus on it. So I just thought that was kind of interesting. Essentially, all we have left of the Temple of Zeus in Pergamum are the foundations that you can see in these images. The base of the altar measured about 100 by 120 feet. It had stairs opening to the west into a courtyard, and it was bounded on 3 sides by columns that were ornamented with the reliefs that you saw in the photograph I showed you a moment ago from the temple in Berlin. These images depict the legend of Telephus, who was the forefather of the Pergamum royal family. The temple also included an offering table known as the seat that was located in the courtyard. The frieze in the reliefs are 7 feet high, and they have a total length of 340 feet. These reliefs depict the struggles of Olympian gods against subterranean powers. Interestingly enough, the friezes that you see in these reliefs are the second longest after the Parthenon frieze in Athens. Pergamum was, of course, the place where John directed his 3rd letter in the book of Revelation. And in Revelation chapter 2 verse 13, it described Pergamum as the place where Satan's throne is, saying, quote, "I know thy works and where thou dwellest, even where Satan's seat is," close quote. Many scholars believe that the seat of Satan referred to by John is a reference to Pergamum's altar in the Temple of Zeus. And if you look at the image, it kind of resembles this gigantic throne. It's now time to leave the Temple of Zeus and head over and a little bit further south to the upper agora shown in our map here by this red arrow. Like many agoras that we've already looked at, this was an area where merchants conducted business. It was a place of public gatherings, a place for shops and things of this nature. From the ruins that remain, it appears that this agora was bounded by stoas, basilicas, porticos, things of this nature, which are essentially buildings for shops and merchants and other public gatherings. This agora was probably dedicated to Hermes, the god of merchants. I'm now showing you a short video about the public agora in relationship to some of the other things that we've seen, such as the theater and the Dionysus temple on that terrace that I've already talked about on a prior occasion. You can see a lot of these ruins down below that are part of that terrace, and as we continue now looking west but sweeping toward the south on the acropolis, you'll begin to see some of the ruins that I've described as stoas and basilicas that were part of this public agora. As we continue to sweep around, going further toward the east and ultimately looking north again, we're going to see the Temple of Zeus. It's kind of blocked by the building that you're going to see here in just a moment, so you don't get a good glimpse of the Temple of Zeus, but that's the trees that you see there right behind this building structure that's part of the agora. Okay, just a couple more images of the agora, and then we're going to travel a little bit further south on the acropolis, going down toward the area called the gymnasium. This consists of structures on 3 separate levels known as the upper, middle, and lower gymnasiums. In reality, there's not too much to see in the gymnasium area because the buildings haven't been reconstructed, but we do know that it was built during the 2nd century BC on the south side of the acropolis, and as I mentioned, it consists of 3 terraces with the main entrance at the southeast corner of the lowest terrace. The lowest or southernmost terrace is small and almost free of buildings. This was part of the boys' gym. The middle terrace was about 750 feet by 210 feet at the center, and the north side there was also a 2-story hall. The east part of the terrace had a small pro-style temple in the Corinthian order. There was also a roofed stadium or a basement stadium between the middle and upper terrace. The upper terrace measured about 450 by 210 feet, and it was the largest of the 3 terraces. It included a courtyard that was surrounded by stoas and other structures. It had a theater-shaped lecture hall beyond the northern stoa during the Roman period, and there was a large banquet hall in the center. The last place we're going to visit before we leave the Acropolis at Pergamum is the sacred precinct of the cult rulers called Heroon. This was a place that consisted of a courtyard and prayer rooms built in the name of the Pergamum kings who were deified in the Hellenistic period. It was thought that it was built during the time of King Attalus I. The buildings in the Heroon were from the Hellenistic period before the time that the Roman Empire took over in the 1st century BC. They were constructed primarily of this gray andesite stone, which is a volcanic stone, which was an important building material during the Hellenistic era. In the time of the Romans, of course, the most important construction material was going to be marble, and so you can tell just by looking at the color of the stones that these are of an older age than things like the Temple of Trajan that had a lot of marble in it, which was that white colored stone that we've seen. Okay, I have just a few more images of the Acropolis in Pergamum that I will let play out before catching our gondola ride back down to the base of the mountain in the modern city of Pergama. So I appreciate you being with me today and sharing this tour. We'll continue our tour in the area of Pergama at the Temple and Medical School of Asclepius, so that's what we will see next, and I look forward to seeing you in my next video log.